of all the divine powers, resplendent light, righteous woman clothed in radiance, taking divine powers and clasp them to your breast. Who can cool your raging heart? Your malevolent anger is too great to cool. You spread exhaustion with storm winds.
Good morning. Welcome to Lost for Words, where we explore great women poets. I'm Sarah, and today we are exploring a new poet, and we are going really far back into ancient history. As you know, we recently explored the poet Sappho, and I originally thought that she was one of the first female poets, and I'm pretty sure I continually said that throughout all my Sappho videos. Not positive, but I'm pretty sure I did. But doing some more digging, I have discovered that there is actually another female poet who predates Sappho by quite a bit. Sappho was around 600 BC, and the poet that we are going to explore today, her name is Enheduanna, and she is a Sumerian poet, author, writer, and she is from 2300 BC, so quite a ways back before Sappho. And she is actually, as of now, she is the first author ever to put her name with her work. So when we're talking first, like Enheduanna is like, as of now, one of our real firsts. To me, she is, it's really exciting to explore her, to think that she lived, over 4,000 years ago in like the cradle of civilization, like, what is that, like ancient Mesopotamia, Sumer. Like, this is where some of the first written words that we know of occurred, one of our first written languages. So before this, there was a time when things were not written down. Thoughts were not written down. Poems were not written down. Songs were not written down. Accounting was not written down. Science was not explored, written down. Everything that we had was oral, was spoken. So it's amazing to think that there is a time in history when everything is oral, and that there's this moment, or there are these moments in cultures where things start to become written, and they can be saved and passed on to future generations as like little windows into cultures that we can barely imagine what it would be like to be there. Enheduanna is like that. She is from this ancient culture, one of the first cultures to have written words. I think it's called cuneiform. And so we have that window, which is so cool. One thing that's really cool about Enheduanna versus Sappho is, I think a lot of the scraps that we have found of Sappho's poetry are written on papyrus, paper. And Enheduanna, I believe a lot of her writings that we have
Are written on clay, because her culture had an abundance of clay. They would create these clay tablets that they would write on with a reed, the edge of a reed. They would press into the clay to make their letters.
Because they were written on something that lasts, like, we still get to see them. Another interesting comparison between these two women: Sappho was a worshiper of Aphrodite, and Enheduanna was a high priestess of a temple in I believe, and she was a worshiper of Inanna, which is the goddess, the queen of heaven and earth. I actually have a book about this goddess, Inanna, queen of heaven and earth, the goddess of love and war and justice. This is such a good book. it tells the mythology of Inanna, and it's like this very beautifully written, poetic mythology of like this heroic female figure that is really, I don't know, to me it's very enjoyable and inspiring and fun to read. So I highly recommend this book if you're interested in mythology of a female goddess that feels like it has like a sense of like agency and heroism to it. You know, a lot of our mythology and stories of heroes revolve around a masculine figure, so it's really fun to read one that revolves around a female figure. So anyway, Enheduanna is a worshiper of this goddess Inanna, the queen of heaven and earth, the goddess of war, love, justice, desire, all those things. But what's really cool to me about it is that Inanna is this ancient goddess that was worshipped, who is believed to inspire the ideas of later goddesses of love, Ishtar, Aphrodite, Venus. Like, she evolved. It's like she's this goddess like from this ancient culture that has evolved into other cultures' goddesses, which to me is really fascinating. So when Sappho is writing her hymns and prayers to the goddess Aphrodite, there is like this connection that goes back to Inanna, who Enheduanna writes poetry to, which is really amazing. Over thousands of years difference, and these women are praying to like an evolved goddess, which is really cool. So I don't know if you remember, but I have a video where I went over, I believe it's like a hymn to Aphrodite, an ode to Aphrodite from Sappho, where she has this prayer to Aphrodite. And in it, it's a desperate plea for help with love from Aphrodite. And this poem today that we're going to explore, this hymn we're going to explore of Enheduanna's, is very similar. It is a exaltation of the goddess Inanna, and at the same time a plea to the goddess Inanna, except that Enheduanna is praying for something very different. Sappho was praying for help with love, like she needed help with love desperately. Enheduanna is a high priestess of a temple, and she has found herself in exile. Her temple has been destroyed, and now she is pleading for help from the goddess Inanna. One of the things that is super interesting to me about both of these hymns, these prayers, these poems, these songs, is that they are prayers. They're not necessarily called prayers, but when you really read them, once you get down into them, if you really look at it, these are prayers or pleas to the goddesses that they worship. And the other week I was looking through some of my old poetry that I had posted on this one account on Instagram. And in some of that poetry, I had written prayers to God. And suddenly, when I was reading them, I felt very embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I posted this. I don't even remember what the prayers were at this moment, but I just remember reading them and feeling like, oh, like I shared something very vulnerable. Like there's something about a prayer or a plea to God that is incredibly vulnerable. Like that you're showing, if you're coming before God with a plea, like you're in a state state that is very vulnerable. And with Sappho, when in her plea for love, she was in a moment of desperation, a moment of helplessness, a moment of being overwhelmed. In Enheduanna's prayer, it's the same thing, except she has found herself an exile and she's in desperate need of Inanna's help. So today we're going to explore it a little bit. It's really, really an amazing piece of writing. I'm going to insert a little rant here. In my search for Enheduanna's hymns and poems, there is not a single book that I can find that has a complete work of her poems and hymns. There is no one who has gathered all of her writings and put them in one book. If you want her work, you have to buy separate books that have a poem here. I do have a book coming in the mail that has all of her hymns, her temple hymns, which I'm really excited about, but I don't think it includes all of her other poems, because all of her poems weren't all temple hymns. So this is just me throwing a request out into the world. If you are a studier of ancient Sumeria and you love poetry and you love Enheduanna's work, please somebody put together a work of her poetry. Please. So I can buy it. Because I really do, I can't stand going through poetry on here and not having a book in my hand. It drives me crazy. So the translation that I found that I actually like is actually on the internet. And so I had to write it down in my little book. Let me see. Not that one. Okay. It's also in, this one poem is in this book, Women from Antiquity to Now, Poets. She has one poem of Enheduanna in here, but it wasn't my favorite translation, so I'm going to do the one that I found online. This is called The Exaltation of Inanna. Here we go. Lady of all the divine powers, resplendent with light, righteous woman clothed in radiance, take in divine powers and clasp them to your breast, raining blazing fire upon the land, riding upon the beast, the destroyer of foreign lands. So we're getting into this exaltation of this goddess Inanna, the queen of heaven and earth, and she's starting off, you're lady of all the divine powers, righteous, bright, radiant, all these divine powers. She has them clasped to her chest. So we have this beautiful bright light in this goddess. But then she's going to switch, and we're going to explore a different side to this goddess that I feel is quite terrifying the farther you get into it. Raining blazing fire upon the land, rides upon the beast, destroyer of foreign lands. At your battle cry, foreign lands bow in awed silence. At your radiant tempest, you spread exhaustion with storm winds. Who can cool your raging heart? Your malevolent anger is too great to cool. So we're starting to get this picture of Inanna, that she's not only this light, radiant, righteous goddess, that she's also full of this fierceness, this loyalty to her own land, this destroyer of foreign lands. She's like the storm that spreads exhaustion. Who can cool your raging heart? Your malevolent anger is too great to cool. To me, that's quite terrifying to be praying to a goddess with these extremes inside of her is pretty intimidating, I feel like. Impetuous wild cow. I believe I read somewhere that this culture, Sumerian culture, Akkadian culture, valued the wild cow in the herd, the one that would do something spontaneous. They valued that wildness. So there's a reference to wild cows quite a bit in some of these poems. Impetuous wild cow, great daughter of Sven. I didn't write this down well. I can't read my own handwriting, but she's a great daughter of God. Lady greater than On, who can take anything from your province? So here is who. She's so powerful, no one can take anything from her. Great queen of queens, issue of a holy womb for righteous divine powers. So then you start to get this idea that this goddess, she's not only divine and powerful, she's a womb that creates and births divine powers. Like, that's pretty amazing. I will recite your holy song, deep-hearted, good woman with a radiant heart. I will enumerate your divine powers. So here we have Enheduanna saying, I'm going to sing your holy song, deep-hearted woman, good woman. So she's, radiant and raging. But Enheduanna calls her good, and she says, I'm going to sing your song, you deep-hearted good woman. And then it has this section that says, approached the light, too hot, approached the shade, covered with storm, my ability to soothe moods vanished. So you can feel Enheduanna approaching this goddess and experiencing her light and radiance, and then her great storm. And maybe it's a feeling of powerlessness a little bit, because she says, my ability to soothe moods vanished. Like, I think there's maybe some part of Enheduanna that wants to soothe this goddess, and realizing she can't. And then she cries out, may On, which I believe is another big god, undo my fate. Step forward so that she will cool her heart for me. I guess she's crying out here to another god, asking for help so that Inanna will cool her heart for Enheduanna. And then she says, Enheduanna will recite a prayer to you, holy Inanna. I shall give free vent to my tears. So here she's about to start her prayer. And she, you can feel this feeling of she's got all these tears that are dammed up inside of her, and she's about to just let them pour. I shall give free vent to my tears. Lugal-an has altered everything, destroyed the temple. My good divine cow, drive out the man, capture the man. He stripped me of my crown and gave me a knife instead, made me walk through the thorn bushes of the mountains. So here is, she's described the goddess Inanna in all her power and chaos and goodness and, all that mix. And then she's asking On to help her cool Inanna's heart for her, it seems like. And she starts to pray to Inanna, and she's like, Lugal-an, this man, has destroyed everything. He destroyed the temple. I'm like, maybe this is Inanna's temple, I wonder. He stripped me of my crown and gave me a knife instead, made me walk through the thorn bushes of the mountains. So here you have Enheduanna. She is this high priestess of this temple, I believe was in Ur. Her father was King Sargon, and he appointed her high priestess over this temple. and she has been driven out by this man, Lugal-an, and he destroyed her temple, this temple. And you have this feeling that Enheduanna is upset with her, I think. I'm not sure. And this man, he took her crown, and then he gave Enheduanna a knife and sent her into exile. This, I don't believe, is just like this piece of art that Enheduanna created just because she wanted to be clever with words. She really was a high priestess of a temple. She really worshipped Enheduanna, and she really was sent into exile. And so here we have this moment in Enheduanna's life when she is at her weakest, her most vulnerable, and she's lost everything. Her temple where she was has been destroyed, and she's praying to Enheduanna, asking for help. And she says, "Be it known, you are the greatest. Might your heart not be appeased towards me." It's like this feeling of, I can't figure out why she thinks Enheduanna needs to be, like her heart needs to be cooled for Enheduanna. But she's asking for Enheduanna to be appeased towards her, to have, like, you're getting like this, almost like a request for like mercy and softness. Like, please don't come at me with your raging storm. Please soften for me. I recite this song for you, great exalted lady. Enheduanna's holy heart has been assuaged. That's the last line of this prayer, this hymn. We have Enheduanna telling us that Enheduanna, this goddess, this fierce storm, this raging storm, has been assuaged, which means to make an unpleasant feeling less intense. So you have this feeling that, like, Enheduanna, she's been sent into exile, she's lost her temple, she's lost everything, and she is saying, please don't be angry with me, please soften towards me, please aid me, please help me, Enheduanna. And the poem ends like in this calm, like it feels like it grows into this rage, and then it feels this like terrible desperation and sadness, and then we end with Enheduanna being assuaged, which means that unpleasantness, that raging storm that she is, that fierceness that she is, has been calmed, maybe has been made less intense. I'm like, oh my gosh, to me this is amazing piece of writing. It has so much like a building of intensity and then fizzling into something calm, and it also has such a piece of, it has such a like power in it, but then it also has this like window into Enheduanna's life, and the vulnerability and the despair in a moment of her life. When she lived, I think things were pretty intense back in this culture, as far as like people trying to take over, and this person trying to be king and that person trying to be king. And so if you look back through Sumerian history, realizing that, you know, like she had this great power, this high priestess, and then at some point in her life, she lost that. The place that she valued most, this temple, was destroyed, and she went from having a crown to wandering through the mountains with a knife in her hand. So you feel this like feeling of being degraded almost, from being something like that's revered to something that's become like a wanderer, you know. I don't know. So I hope you guys enjoyed that piece of writing from Enheduanna. I hope you could feel the beauty and intensity and the vulnerability and the desperation in her plea to her goddess, Enheduanna. I guess it makes me think about prayer. Like, I guess one thing I would throw out to the world is like, have you ever written down a prayer? Do you have a God? Do you worship a God? Have you ever prayed to the God that you worship? Has your prayer ever been as desperate as Sappho, as desperate as Enheduanna, or as desperate as Enheduanna? Have you ever had an answered prayer? Anyway, we'll stop there. Thank you so much for exploring that with me. And I will see you again next time. Goodbye.